The 2025 pre-season testing has concluded, and we must say that we've been left with a lot of questions in our heads. The biggest one revolves around Ferrari and what the Maranello team is hiding, because the third day hasn't gone exactly as they planned. McLaren is showing strong potential and a lot of pace, so with the Woking-based squad being the team to catch, what will the solution of Ferrari be, and can they rely on the supremacy of Hamilton to deliver top-notch feedback to fix all of the issues plaguing the SF-25 so far? There is no question about how Bahrain could have gone better for some of the teams on the grid, especially for Ferrari and Red Bull. These two had a lot more in storage, but have admitted that they're not exactly getting what they wanted from their cars. And whilst this was expected for Red Bull due to their slump of performance in 2024, it definitely wasn't expected for Ferrari. The Maranello team is entering the season with a lot of hope that a championship can finally be brought to their porch. However, that might not be the case after looking at the first impressions from the SF-25. Fred Vasseur has been the first one to talk about Bahrain, as he wants to let the fans know one thing: there is nothing to be worried about. The circumstances in Bahrain were quite odd, to say the least, and while the SF-25 showed some issues on the cold tarmac, it's something that Vasseur believes won't happen when they go to Australia. Elaborating further on this, the Frenchman said, "This year we will go from the 10 to 15 degrees we found on the track here to the 45 degrees we will have in Australia, so it could be that in Melbourne it will be a completely different story." But there is no doubt about it, the new concept of the SF-25 has raised some questions as to whether or not it actually has the potential to be the championship winning one. For starters, the pace it's shown throughout testing was nowhere near expected compared to McLaren, and although it's worth noting that teams are hiding performance here, the same can be said for the Woking-based squad, as they are looking to unleash even more power in Melbourne from the MCL 39. The car's new concept is definitely something that needs to be talked about, because Ferrari have kept only 1% of its predecessor applied to the SF-25. This goes to show that they might have a lot to learn headed into the new season, and when it's the last season of the current regulations, you can't really change that much if something goes horribly wrong. Ferrari have been known for the fact that they already have upgrades on the way for the SF-25, but until they arrive, we need to see how their car looked in Bahrain and what aspects of it can and will be fixed in the first opportunity available. For starters, the 2025 Challenger has a stronger front end. This is definitely not linked to the fact that the team adopted the new pull rod suspension, but the load centre is moving forward. This does create a positive tendency on the front limited circuits, but as a result, it creates a problem on tracks with opposite requirements, such as Bahrain. This might be one of the reasons why Ferrari is not too worried about what they've shown in the Desert's pre-season testing, and the 1/10 deficit that was projected they have to McLaren might even be better news for them. Nevertheless, there are lots of tracks that will reminisce the nature of Bahrain, and that's why the team needs to find a wider operating window if they want to be as competitive as McLaren. Ferrari has worked with a rather light medium downforce wing, even though each car has its own aerodynamic mapping, which means that the team can rebalance oversteer or understeer. The configuration that the Maranello team used was very similar to their opponent's McLaren, but it was certainly lighter than Red Bull and Mercedes, which is why certain issues of the car's behaviour were amplified more than we could have hoped for, such as the setup and stability under braking. This is an area that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later by Ferrari's engineers, and while the SF-25 has a lot to give us before we can make any predictions whatsoever, the potential has not been questioned at any given point. This can be extracted from the statements that have been made by Leclerc and Hamilton, and while the 7-time world champion was much happier with the car despite the third day's tyre degradation ruining the race pace plan they had for him, that cannot be said for his teammate. When talking about the SF-25 in general and the first impressions in Bahrain, Hamilton said, "Over the last 4 years or so, I can't judge the cars too much and take too much on my first outlook. I mean, for me, I definitely think in the past, years before that, taking the previous generation car was much easier. I think to know where you stood quite early on with that kind of feeling, I would say this is the most positive feeling that I've had in a long time." Personally, I like to just jump in deep and figure it out. That's what we've been doing. We've gone through the processes and tried to really build a good foundation, and we've made it. But everyone knows these guys out there are really, really quick and really competitive. It looks very, very close. We might not know until race week where we stand, but we know that we've got work to do. Yes, there is a cautious optimism from Hamilton's side, because if we're to put ourselves in his shoes, it's the first time that he's testing a new car after the switch he made to Mercedes in 2013. With this being said, Hamilton nearing the age of 40 might not mean that much if his motivation and ability to extract the absolute maximum out of the car will be showcased to absolute perfection. But unlike him, Leclerc was a bit more reserved about the feeling of the car and warned the fans as well as the teams that there is a lot to be worked on in order to fix the car as they'd want ahead of the first race in Australia. When talking about it, the Monegasque driver went on to say, "We see the numbers we expected, even if on Thursday afternoon and on Friday we had a little more difficulty in managing the balance, so there is still a lot to do. Without a doubt, the weather has played a fairly important role these days, not only in terms of pure temperatures, but also for the wind. I would wait a little longer before making any predictions. At the moment, we are working hard to try to improve the balance. We struggled a bit in the last 2 days. We will see in Melbourne, but let's say that in the last 2 days we struggled a bit more with the balance, so that is what we are focusing more." If there is something that we can extract from these two statements, it's that Ferrari needs to understand the basics of its problems as soon as they can, because while the car is showing the potential they've expected, it might not be as big of a leap as we would have hoped from their earlier statements. The impression was that they've made a significant step ahead and that they could be on par with McLaren, but the on-track predictions from the pre-season performance are not favouring Ferrari as much as we hoped for before the pre-season testing. Of course, there is still work to be done and we can't rely solely on these results, but it's definitely a challenge that needs to be tackled as soon as possible, because the team is entering the season with a brand new car that is giving the drivers mixed feelings about what they should expect from the first race. Again, Leclerc has pinpointed the issue in the track's conditions as well, not just the car's odd performance, and when talking about it, he said, "It's a bit difficult to confirm the feelings I have for the SF-25 because I don't think I've ever experienced Bahrain like this before. It was cold and rainy. These are not the temperatures we are used to, so it's difficult to make a reference compared to previous years where we had warmer conditions. In testing, you focus a lot on yourself, but obviously you also look at what the others are doing. Even if you don't know how they are going, there are still a lot of unknowns, so we have to take the times with a pinch of salt. Nevertheless, the hopes in the Maranello team are still high and they have invested a lot in the new design, so it'll be interesting to see how it's going to play out in terms of the competition compared to McLaren. They are the two teams that we expect to fight it out at the front, even though statements from Mercedes are kind of creating a scenario in which Russell and Antonelli can somehow make trouble for the top teams, taking away a couple of wins and strong point finishes as well. With all this in mind, what do you think about the latest statements regarding Ferrari's fixes for the SF-25, and more importantly, do you think they sandbagged heavily compared to the other teams in Bahrain? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're interested in Piastri's latest bombshell news from McLaren, make sure to check out the video that appears on your screen right now.